God's work never stops, even when we can't see it, even when we don't feel it, even when every circumstance around us seems to say otherwise. God is still moving. That's the very nature of who he is. Always working, always orchestrating, always aligning things for our good. But the problem is we often judge God's activity based on what we see in front of us. If things look good, we assume God is working. If things look bad, we assume he has stepped back. But let me tell you something. God is not limited by what you can see. Think about the Israelites standing in front of the Red Sea. In that moment, they didn't see a way forward. They saw an obstacle, a dead end, an impossible situation. They saw Pharaoh's army behind them and the water blocking their path ahead. But what they couldn't see was that God was already working a miracle before they even cried out for help. Long before Moses ever lifted his staff, long before the waters ever parted, God had already set the plan in motion. He didn't need their approval. He didn't need their understanding. He just needed them to trust that he was working even when they couldn't see it. That's the challenge for us, isn't it? We live in a world that operates on instant results. We want to see progress. We want confirmation. We want something tangible. But God doesn't operate on our timeline. Just because you don't see the change happening doesn't mean the change isn't in motion. There are some things God is working on right now that you won't see the results of until years down the line. And when you finally step into that blessing, you'll look back and realize he was working the entire time. Take Joseph, for example. He was thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. If you had asked Joseph in that moment, is God working? He might have struggled to see it because nothing about his situation looked like progress. But what was God doing? He was positioning Joseph. He was preparing him. He was aligning everything so that at the right time, Joseph would step into his purpose as second in command over Egypt. Looking back, Joseph could say, what you meant for evil, God meant for good, Genesis 50:20. That's because God never stopped working even when Joseph couldn't see it. And that same God is still working in your life today. Some of you feel stuck. You feel like nothing is changing. You feel like the prayers you've been praying aren't being answered. But just because you don't see the movement doesn't mean God isn't moving. Some things take time. Some things require preparation. Some things God is working out in ways you wouldn't even understand if he showed you right now. That's why he calls us to walk by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5:7. I don't know what you're facing today, but I do know this. God hasn't stopped working. He's working in your family. He's working in your career. He's working in your relationships. He's working in ways you haven't even considered yet. And when the time is right, when the process is complete, when everything is aligned the way he intended, you'll step into what he's been preparing for you all along. So don't let stress steal your peace. Don't let doubt rob you of your trust in God. The enemy wants you to believe that nothing is happening, that God has forgotten you, that your prayers aren't making a difference, but the devil is a liar. God's work is not dependent on your feelings or your ability to see it. It's dependent on his faithfulness. And let me remind you, he has never failed. Think about Jesus. When he was hanging on the cross, it looked like the end. To his followers, it seemed like all hope was lost. But what they couldn't see was that in the very moment of their greatest despair, God was doing his greatest work. While they were weeping, while they were doubting, while they were questioning, he was working. The tomb was only temporary. Resurrection was already set in motion. And on the third day, Jesus got up, proving once and for all that God is always working, even in the moments when it looks like all hope is gone. I came to remind somebody today, God is working in your life. It may not look like it, but he's making a way. It may not feel like it, but he's shifting things in your favor. You may feel like you're in a season of waiting, but let me tell you, the waiting is not wasted. God is preparing you. He is strengthening you. He is aligning things for the right time. And when that time comes, you'll see what he was doing all along. So stop stressing. Stop trying to figure it all out on your own. Stop letting worry consume you. And instead, trust. Trust that the same God who parted the Red Sea, the same God who elevated Joseph from the pit to the palace, the same God who raised Jesus from the dead, that same God is working in your life right now. And he's not stopping anytime soon. Worry is one of the greatest thieves of joy, peace, and faith. It sneaks into our minds, takes root in our hearts, and before we know it, we're overwhelmed by fear, stress, and anxiety about things we can't even control. But here's the truth. Worry has never changed the situation for the better. It has never solved a problem, healed a wound, or opened a door. In fact, worry only drains you, exhausts you, and leaves you feeling more helpless than before. And yet we do it anyway. Jesus spoke directly to this in Matthew 6:27 when he asked, "Can any one of you by worrying add a single hour to your life?" The answer is obvious, no. Worry doesn't add, it subtracts. It doesn't build up, it tears down. It doesn't create solutions, it creates more stress. Worry takes today's peace and trades it for tomorrow's unknown. It fixates on the what ifs and magnifies the worst case scenarios. But the truth is, the things we spend the most time worrying about often never even happen. We waste energy stressing over outcomes that God already has under control, but there's an alternative. Worship. Worship does what worry never could. It shifts our focus from the problem to the problem solver, from our stress to our Savior, from what we can't do to what God can do. Worship reminds us that we are not in control, but we serve a God who is. It replaces fear with faith and anxiety with assurance. Worship takes our eyes off the uncertainty of our circumstances and fixes them on the certainty of God's promises. Let's look at Paul and Silas in Acts 16. They were beaten, thrown into prison, and locked in chains, not because they did something wrong, but because they were faithful to God. If anyone had a reason to worry, it was them. They could have sat in that prison cell, replaying the situation over and over in their minds, asking, what's going to happen next? Will we ever get out? Why did this happen to us? But they didn't do that. Instead, the Bible says that at midnight, Paul and Silas begin to pray and sing praises to God. And in that moment, something powerful happened. Their worship triggered a breakthrough. As they worshiped, God shook the very foundation of the prison. The doors flew open, the chains broke off, not just for them, but for everyone around them. That's the power of worship. It invites God's presence into the situation. It creates an atmosphere for miracles. It turns a prison cell into a place of praise. It shifts the atmosphere from despair to deliverance. Some of you have been in a midnight moment for too long. You've been sitting in a place of uncertainty, fear, and stress, wondering when things are going to change. But what if, instead of worrying about it, you started worshiping through it? What if your praise is the very thing that unlocks the breakthrough? What if the weight you've been carrying is released the moment you lift your hands and declare, God, I trust you anyway? You see, worry makes the problem bigger in our minds, but worship makes God bigger in our hearts. The enemy wants you to focus on what's wrong. He wants you to be consumed with fear, panic, and doubt, because as long as you're stressed out, you're spiritually shut down. But when you worship, you confuse the enemy. When you lift your hands in the middle of the storm, when you declare God's goodness in the face of difficulty, when you praise him before you see the answer, that's when chains start breaking. Look at King Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 20. He was surrounded by 3 enemy armies, outnumbered, and in the natural, defeat seemed inevitable. But instead of panicking, he turned to God. And do you know how God told him to fight the battle? With worship. Jehoshaphat sent out the worshipers first, and as they sang praises, God set ambushes against their enemies. The battle was won through worship, and if worship was powerful enough to break open a prison for Paul and Silas, if it was strong enough to defeat armies for Jehoshaphat, don't you think it's powerful enough to shift your situation? What if the stress that's been weighing you down is no match for a song of praise? What if the anxiety that's been keeping you up at night breaks when you lift your voice and declare, God is still in control? What if, instead of worrying, you decided to worship your way through? Because here's the truth. God already has the solution. He already has the outcome plan. He already knows the way through. But your job isn't to figure it all out. Your job is to trust. Your job is to praise Him in the process. Your job is to worship while you wait. Some of you have been saying, God, when you fix this, then I'll praise you. But that's not how it works. Praise first, worship now, because when you worship, you invite God into the battle. And when God steps in, victory is inevitable. So the next time you feel worry creeping in, the next time anxiety tries to take over, the next time you're tempted to stress about what you can't control, stop, lift your hands, open your mouth, declare the goodness of God. Because worry won't change the situation, but worship will change you. And when God changes you, that's when everything else begins to shift. So what will you choose? Will you let stress and fear rule your mind? Or will you worship through it, trusting that the God who did it before will do it again? One thing is certain, worry may not change your situation, but worship will change your spirit. And when your spirit is strong in God, there is no situation, no storm, no struggle that can shake you, because you know who holds the victory, and His name is Jesus. Life has a way of piling pressure on us. The weight of expectations, responsibilities, and the unknown future can feel overwhelming. We carry burdens we were never meant to bear. Trying to fix things, trying to control outcomes, trying to make everything work out according to our plans. But here's the truth. The pressure isn't yours to carry. You were never designed to hold the weight of the world on your shoulders. That's God's job, and He does it a lot better than we ever could. Think about how often we take on stress that isn't ours to handle. We worry about things that only God can control. We replay situations in our minds trying to figure out every possible outcome as if our anxiety can somehow alter the future. But Jesus never called us to live like that. He didn't say, come to me, all you who are weary, and I'll give you more to worry about. No, He said in Matthew 11, 28, 30, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus is saying, stop carrying things I never asked you to carry. Let me take the weight off of you. Let me be the one who holds it all together. But the problem is, we don't always trust Him enough to do that. We think if we don't stress about it, if we don't keep working nonstop, if we don't keep worrying, then things will fall apart. But who told you that you were responsible for holding everything together? That's not your job. That's God's job. Look at Moses in Exodus 14. The Israelites had just escaped Egypt, and now they were trapped between Pharaoh's army and the Red Sea. Panic set in. The people were terrified. They started blaming Moses, saying, why did you bring us out here to die? And Moses, in that moment, had every reason to feel the pressure. After all, he was their leader. But instead of panicking, he told them, the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. Moses understood something we often forget. God fights the battles, not us. God makes the way, not us. Our job is to trust, not to carry the pressure of figuring it all out. And what happened? God split the Red Sea, making a way where there was no way. Some of us need to hear that today. The battle you're stressing over isn't yours to fight. The outcome you're worrying about isn't yours to control. The pressure you feel to fix everything isn't yours to carry. God is the one who parts seas. God is the one who makes a way. Your job is to trust Him even when you don't see the way forward. One of the biggest reasons we carry pressure that isn't ours is because we feel like we have to be in control. We think, if I don't do it, it won't happen. If I don't hold it together, everything will fall apart. But where in the Bible does God ever say, you got this all on your own? He doesn't. Instead, He says things like, be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. He says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. 1 Peter 5:7. He says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Philippians 4:6. That means your job isn't to carry the weight, it's to trust the one who does. Let's talk about David for a second. When he faced Goliath, the entire army of Israel was paralyzed with fear. They were carrying the weight of the battle on their own shoulders, thinking they had to fight with their own strength. But David understood something they didn't. The battle wasn't his to fight, it was God's. That's why he told Goliath, the battle is the Lord's, 1 Samuel 17:47. David walked onto the battlefield with no armor, no heavy weapons, just a slingshot and a trust in God that took the pressure off of him. And we all know what happened, victory. Some of us need to start living like David. We need to stop putting on the armor of pressure and start walking in the confidence that God has already won the battle. So what does that look like in your life? Maybe it's letting go of the need to control every detail. Maybe it's stopping the endless cycle of overthinking and stressing over things you can't change. Maybe it's releasing the need to have all the answers and choosing to rest in the fact that God already has the answers. And let's be real, God is better at running the universe than we are. He's been doing it for a long time, and last I checked, he's never failed. So why do we act like everything depends on us? Why do we live like we have to carry all the weight when God is saying, give it to me? If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're exhausted from trying to carry everything, if you're tired of the weight of expectations, it's time to let go. The pressure isn't yours to carry. The battle isn't yours to fight. The outcome isn't yours to control. God is saying, let me handle this. Let me carry what you weren't meant to carry. Let me fight for you while you rest in me. So take a deep breath. Release the weight. Step into the peace that comes when you stop carrying what was never yours to carry. Because when you finally let go, that's when you'll see just how powerfully God was working all along. There's a powerful truth that will change the way you live, the way you pray, and the way you sleep at night. If it's in God's hands, it's already handled. We spend so much of our time worrying, overthinking, and stressing about situations we can't control. We try to figure out every possible outcome, make every backup plan, and do everything in our own power to make things work. But let me ask you something. When has worrying ever fixed anything? When has anxiety ever changed the outcome? When has stress ever made a situation better? Jesus said in Matthew 6:27, can any one of you by worrying add a single hour to your life? And the answer is no. In fact, worry does the opposite. It steals our peace, drains our energy, and distracts us from the truth that God is already working on what we're worrying about. Think about this. If you've given something to God, why are you still carrying it? If you truly believe He is in control, why are you still acting like the weight of the outcome is on your shoulders? The moment you place something in His hands, it's already handled. It may not happen on your timeline, it may not look the way you expected, but God never fails to fulfill His promises. Let's look at the story of Abraham and Isaac in Genesis 22. God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son, the very promise He had given him. That didn't make sense. But Abraham trusted God enough to put everything in his hands, and because he trusted, God provided a ram in the thicket just in time. Abraham didn't have to fight for a way out, stress over the outcome, or try to fix things himself. He simply obeyed, and God already had the solution waiting. How many times have we worried ourselves sick over something that God already had an answer for? How many nights have we lost sleep over things that God had already worked out? If we could see what God is doing behind the scenes, we'd never doubt again. But that's why faith is required. Faith says, I don't have to see it to believe it. I don't have to know how it will happen. I just have to trust that God already has it handled. One of the biggest reasons we struggle with trusting God is because we don't like to let go. We want to know the plan, control the process, and make sure everything goes according to our expectations. But faith doesn't work that way. Faith isn't about control, it's about release. It's about saying, God, I don't know how this will work out, but I trust you. I'm not going to stress over it because it's not mine to handle. It's yours. Look at Peter 5:7. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. Notice it says cast, That means to throw, to release, to let it go. It doesn't say hand it to God, but keep checking on it. It doesn't say give it to God, but keep stressing about it. No, it says to cast it, because once it's in his hands, it's no longer your burden to carry. Take the story of the disciples in Mark 4. They were in a boat with Jesus, and a storm came out of nowhere. The wind was raging, the waves were crashing, and they panicked. But what was Jesus doing? Sleeping. Not because he didn't care, but because he wasn't worried. He knew who was in control. And when they woke him up, he calmed the storm with just 3 words: peace, be still. Some of us need to let Jesus speak those same words over our situation. We've been stressing over things he's already in control of. We've been panicking while he's saying, why are you afraid? Don't you know who I am? Don't you know that I've already handled it? The reality is, when we truly put something in God's hands, we should experience peace, not panic. If you're still feeling overwhelmed, it may be because you haven't fully let it go. You may have prayed about it, but you didn't leave it there. You picked it back up with worry, with doubt, with trying to control what only God can control. But God is saying today, if it's in my hands, you don't have to carry it anymore. If I'm handling it, you don't have to stress about it. If you trust me, then rest in me. Think about David standing before Goliath. Everyone else saw an impossible situation, but David, he saw a God-sized victory. He didn't stress about how big Goliath was because he knew how big his God was. And before he even stepped onto the battlefield, the battle was already won because it was in God's hands. That's the kind of faith we need to have. The kind that says, if I prayed about it, I'm not going to worry about it. If I placed it in God's hands, I refuse to pick it back up in fear. So what is it that you've been carrying? What burden have you been holding on to that God has been waiting for you to release? Maybe it's your future, your family, your finances, your health, your dreams. Whatever it is, put it in his hands and leave it there. Because here's the truth, when it's in God's hands, it's already handled. You don't have to fight for the solution. You don't have to stress over the outcome. You don't have to live in fear of what's next. You just have to trust. You just have to believe. And you just have to rest in the fact that the same God who has been faithful before will be faithful again, because when he's in control, victory is already guaranteed.